Okay, good morning, or afternoon or evening, I guess depends on when you wake up. I want to go through some of the basics of our evolution unit, some of the things that you sort of looked at over the last couple of days, last week, I suppose, just as an overview. I teach the unit in two parts, and we're kind of done with that first part. Um, and they are history and theory. History is all about how this theory came about, why this theory came about, and who was involved in making this theory. Um, Whereas the theory is the function. How does this happen? What does it actually say about the process? Specifically, we need a mechanism. We need a way for it to work. And that was one of the big problems that Darwin had, is because he didn't know about DNA, um, his mechanism was not complete. And that was one of the reasons a lot of people had a hard time believing it, even in the scientific community, when he first came out with this theory. So the history is all about who was involved. Let's move that over a little bit. And of course, there are two main figures you want to be able to identify with when you start talking about evolution. The first is Jean-Baptiste Lamarck. Um, he was French, and he had a theory of evolution. He actually had a theory of evolution long before Darwin did. As you found out in your timelines, I hope that Charles Darwin, while we give him credit for the theory of evolution, was hardly the first person to come up with this idea. There were many other people before him that had similar ideas. And so Charles Darwin is the next person that was involved. And so we can just go ahead and start to make some connections between evolution, history, and theory. History is all about who was involved. And our key players that we really want to remember are Jean-Baptiste Lamarck and Charles Darwin. Okay? Um, if you did any reading when you were working on your timeline, you know all about Charles Darwin. He got on this boat called the HMS Beagle. He was English, sailed around the world, went to all these great places, but the place that he is most associated with are the Galapagos Islands, which are just off the coast of South America. And he looked at finches there, and he looked at tortoises there, and he looked at all kinds of plants and animals there. Um, and the thing in his year-long journey around the world by a boat, that didn't have a motor, by the way, it was a gigantic, tall ship with sails. Um, he saw how different everything was, and it varied from location to location. But at the same time, he saw this unity, and that's something that a theory of evolution needs to address. That even though life is very, very diverse on the planet, we do have a lot of similarities, and that these similarities can be found sort of everywhere. I mean, you've got birds all over the world, and birds are generally put together this same way. And we have mammals all over the planet, and mammals have certain things in common. Well, how is it that they've gotten to be so widespread around everywhere? So, Jean Baptiste Lamarck. Eh, had an idea about how all this would work. His idea was acquired characteristics. And the story that goes with that most often is the giraffe, that giraffes had to constantly look up to get food, and they stretched to get to the top of the trees. And over time, because they kept stretching, their neck got longer, and this enabled them to get more food to survive. And this is a good thing for the giraffes. Um, and it was a good theory, and at the time people believed it. It seemed to make sense. But the big problem, oh boy, what happened? I'm gonna put everything back and make it all right. I don't want that. The problem with acquired characteristics is this is no. Let's see. There we go. Acquired characteristics is incorrect. It's kind of like if you went to the gym and lifted weights and got all built up. Your children are not going to inherit all those muscles. They were acquired during your life, and there's no way for you to pass those on. Similarly, in our modern society, tattoos are really, really popular. If you go and get inked up, your children are not going to be born with tattoos. Those were characteristics that were acquired by you later in life, and there's no way for them to be passed on. And that's the big problem with acquired characteristics. While, yeah, there might be some part of this that works, it doesn't work everywhere. And that's where Charles Darwin had a different theory, and that was natural selection. So natural selection is totally associated with Charles Darwin. There's a standard sort of process that happens with natural selection, regardless of what it is. There's this idea that overpopulation happens. Any particular species, any particular group will constantly make more offspring than they need to survive and keep the species going. Within that population, because they are generally reproducing by sexual reproduction. Remember, over 90% of the things that live on the planet are sexual reproducers. There's random variation there. We know that comes from the process of meiosis and creating gametes. And that random variation ultimately is what makes individuals different. And now we have a way that we get this variation. We get variation within a population. We get variation within families. We get variation within a species. So the next thing that happens is we've got some sort of a selective pressure. Let's put some lines in for us. Okay. Selective pressure is what prevents the entire population from surviving. What is it that stops individuals from reproducing? And we find all sorts of things, like a lack of resources could be a selective pressure. Living space can be a selective pressure. Maybe there's not enough homes for every organism to actually survive. Maybe there are not enough mates for individuals that they just simply can't reproduce and pass their genes on. Or maybe there is some sort of interaction with another species that ends up very negatively for this group, like predation. If you get eaten, you don't get to survive to reproduce, and that's unfortunate, but that's part of the circle of life. We've all seen Lion King. So those are all of our selective well, that's not all, but those are some of the really major selective pressures that we see. And so once we have this overpopulation, which has random variation, now we have a selective pressure. This creates that struggle to survive. Not every individual is going to be able to do this. How that gets determined is all about the combination of these other things here, where the random variation and selective pressure create this sort of interaction. Some individuals, because they are different, are going to be better at finding resources, at maintaining and defending a living space, at attracting a mate or avoiding a predator. And that's what we call an adaptation. And those adaptations give an advantage. In the natural world, not every organism is created equal, and it's a good thing that that's true, because individuals have things that they are good at and that they are less good at, but that creates this idea of advantage, and is really, really important for survival. And that's the last thing. Only some of these individuals are going to survive. Um, they can't all get what they need. And that's kind of the overview of evolution. It's a pretty straightforward and simple concept, but it's also massively, massively misunderstood. Many people get it wrong, and the biggest thing, I'll give you the hint now, and you'll hear it repeated over and over by me, is this idea that random variation happens first. Um, Random variation happens before the selective pressure. Individuals are born with all their traits intact, all the genes they're ever going to have. We can't get new ones. And this idea of acquired characteristics, while things may change over time, there's no way to pass those on. But the variations that we inherited from our parents, we can pass on to our offspring. And if those variations allow us to survive better, then our children get those and they have the ability to survive better. And that's this idea of advantage allowing some to survive. Okay, so I hope this was helpful. And I'm going to try to put up more videos as things move forward. Whether it's demonstration of labs or clarification of some ideas. Okay, have a great day, hang in there, and this will hopefully all be over soon, and we'll get back to school, and we'll have a good summer. Okay, bye-bye.